us that your daughter's been missing. When you met each other?
I believe about 2 years.
Rob McLeod and Bob Markham are part of a club that nobody wants to join. Fathers of adult women who have gone missing.
So these two still grieving fathers join forces to find their daughters.
I was really losing hope that she was going to show up on her own.
That's when they told me that there were more than Casey. There were other people missing.
Describe Jennifer Markham. 25 years old, a single mom?
She was. Lived here in Denver. She lived about 20 miles south of where Casey disappeared.
He looks Markham and his wife in the eye and says, "Your daughter is dead, and I know where she's buried."
I had a chill run down my spine, and I couldn't.
Did you really know how my daughter died?
At this point, we knew we had a serial killer on our hands.
But has he tried to kill before?
And I remember screaming, "Stop the car. Why aren't you stopping?"
And grabbing me by my face and then pushing me out by my face.
He went like this and just pushed you out.
I thought I was going to lose my brother. I've never been so scared of my life.
This is the story of someone who was so charismatic and yet so devious that they were able to manipulate the system to conceal horrific crimes. And in the process, they inflicted excruciating pain on those who cared for and trusted them. But more than anything, it was a betrayal of those closest to this person and the theft of what we all cherish most, the lives of those we love. I've had a 35-year career of telling stories, and every so often there's one that haunts me. This is one of them. It's a story that I first covered almost 2 decades ago, and it begins as a heartbreaking tale of a missing teenager.
Good evening and welcome to 2020.
Back in 2008, I began looking into this story, and that's when I first spoke to Lori McLeod, a divorced mother of a beautiful girl, the light of her life.
She just happy all the time, smiled all the time.
This was Lori back then. This is her today.
Casey was beautiful and sweet. She was a peacekeeper. She didn't make waves.
In 2003, Lori McLeod was living with her daughter, Casey, who was 19.
I just lived my life with my daughter, and I worked a lot. Very simple life, and I liked it that way.
She was mid-30s at that point, divorced from her husband, Rob.
In spite of the divorce and the drama between her mom and I, Casey was a very bubbly, happy-go-lucky kid. She really was a special kid.
As Casey grows into a teenager, Lori's got a little more free time, and she enjoys doing a little gambling at a nearby casino. Boston 5 Poker, that's her game.
I was playing a card game, and he walked in.
Scott Kimball met Lori McLeod when they both went to a casino up in Blackhawk. Scott was wheeling in his mother, Barb, in a wheelchair, and they all sit at the same poker table.
He's moving chairs for her so she could play cards. I thought, well, what a nice guy, he's taking care of his mother. And we just started chatting at the table.
What did he tell you about himself in that first meeting?
He said he worked for the FBI. Scott was nice, and he was pleasant, and he laughed, and he was funny. All of the things a woman looks for.
And Lori believed, after many false starts, that this could finally be the man of her dreams.
Scott Kimball is 36 years old and divorced. He's a burly, outdoorsy type of a guy with a goatee and an engaging smile. Guys like him, and women find him charming. In fact, long before Lori, Kimball was married to a woman named Larissa. In 1993,
Scott married Larissa and they settled in Spokane, Washington.
For the first time in public, Mr. and Mrs. Scott and Larissa Kimball.
They had 2 boys together.
I was 3 months pregnant when we got married. Justin was born soon after. And then 2.5 years later, I had Cody.
Cody?
I just thought that we would be the perfect family.
Kimball is often away from home working for long stretches, but he always takes time to be with his sons, Justin and Cody, and he makes them feel special.
Here we go. Okay, here. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you.
Justin, look up here. What do you think of that?
We would go paintballing. We would do go-karts. We'd go out to eat almost like every single night.
When I sat down with Justin for this exclusive interview, he told me he would need to wear sunglasses to protect his eyes from our bright lights. It's because of a traumatic brain injury that he suffered as a child. But that's his own story, which he will share later for the first time.
My dad was very big on trying to spoil us and just see how happy he could make us by just buying us whatever he wanted.
He was a great dad. Hi, babe. He was everything in a dad that I wanted growing up.
Justin and Cody were too small to see this, but this whole time, the marriage itself was not strong.
I found out that he was dating and actually living with another woman.
In 1996, Larissa filed for divorce, and 4 years later, she and their 2 boys moved to the Colorado area.
By 2002, Scott Kimball is also living and working in Colorado, once again near his boys, Justin and Cody. A year later, he moves in with Lori McLeod.
Scott Kimball is living with Lori McLeod at her house in Lafayette. They're getting quite close during this period, and Casey is living at the house as well with her mother and now this new man who has entered her mother's life. Where they lived together was a rural area that was largely ranchettes, mostly prairie land.
Scott had 2 boys of his own,
Yes, he
Justin
did.
and Cody.
Yeah.
And they'd come to visit?
Yes, I loved his boys.
And his boys loved your daughter?
Oh, yeah. They were great with Casey, too. Having 2 little brothers was fun for her.
So how did he act around Casey?
He acted like the guy every woman would be looking for to be in their child's life.
Unfortunately, Casey is struggling. Her mom's divorce seems to be taking a heavy emotional toll on her.
When she was in her later teens, mid-teens, she was kind of getting rebellious, running around with the wrong crowd, doing the wrong things.
Casey had been into drugs, had run away, but she seemed to be coming back into who both Rob and Lori hoped she would become.
This video was shot at Casey's high school graduation. It was a time full of hope and promise.
I'm really confident that I'll be able to do something with my life after this. I just want to thank you for inviting me.
She had found a new boyfriend, CB. They were both working at Subway, and she and CB were serious. They were even talking about marriage at the time.
She was trying to get her life kind of back.
Labor Day of 2003? What made you believe that Casey was doing drugs again?
Scott brought a vial of something with white substance in it, chunky white substance.
Crack cocaine or something?
Right. And he said, I think Casey's in trouble again. And so when I approached her and asked her if she was doing drugs again, she swore she was not. I didn't believe her.
So you told her you're going to take her to the police?
Yes, I did.
And what happened?
So I went in and got my wallet, and Scott came in the house, and I said, "Where's Casey?" And he says, "She's outside." And I said, I'm very certain she will take off. And sure enough, she did.
In the late summer of 2003, Casey McLeod disappears. And Lori McLeod is understandably upset by this.
She was nowhere to be found at that point.
After a few days, you get a call from Casey, right? What did she say?
She said, I am sorry and I love you. I told her I loved her. That was the last thing we said to each other.
The first indications that Casey went missing, it was Lori gave us a very panicked phone call and that Casey had run away.
Now, Casey insists that the drugs her mom's boyfriend Scott Kimball finds don't belong to her. But her mom, Lori, isn't buying it. So Casey takes off to avoid the police. And she meets up with her boyfriend, CB.
I was more angry at her than concerned. You know, I mean, I was praying for her to get her act together and to come home, but in the back of my mind, I was a little bit more unhappy with her.
Kimball is able to locate Casey and her boyfriend, CB, offering them a temporary haven to cool off.
So Scott finds Casey, finds CB, and puts them up in a Motel 6.
And her and her boyfriend lived there for several days, unbeknownst to Lori.
Tells them, stay away from Lori because she's mad and she'll turn you into the cops.
On August 23rd, Casey's boyfriend gave her an engagement necklace, and she was headed to work.
CB comes, kisses Casey goodbye, and CB puts their engagement necklace, the one that he bought her, around her neck. Says, I love you.
Scott shows up at the Motel 6 and offers to take Casey to her job at a Subway sandwich shop. She gets in the car and off they go to her shift at Subway.
So Subway calls a couple hours later, both Lori and CB, because Casey didn't show up for work. They call each other confused because they have two different stories. CB says Scott took her to work. Lori says no, Scott's out hunting.
Lori's, of course, a bit confused because Kimball had told her he was going to go elk hunting for a few days and wouldn't have been around.
When Scott returns from his hunting trip, he's confronted by CB, Casey's boyfriend, who insists that he saw Casey get into a truck with Scott at the Motel 6. And he says, where is she?
Scott had picked Casey up, and CB had seen it. CB confronted him about where Casey was. Scott denied picking Casey up and said he didn't know what CB was talking about.
When I confronted Scott about picking her up to take her to work, he said, CB's lying.
Did he appear supportive while Casey was missing?
Absolutely. Let's go looking for her. Let's drive around. With my connections, we'll find her. Scott went with me to the police. So when I am describing my missing daughter, he's giving information that she had been on drugs before and that she had left before. The police said we aren't looking for her because she's 19 and she's allowed to be missing.
And remember, since Kimball is working with the FBI, Lori is convinced he's the only one who can help.
Scott and I had planned to go to Las Vegas before Casey went missing. I wanted to cancel, and he said she's an adult, she'll come home when she's ready. When we get there, it was just this heavy push. You need me, let's get married. You know, I can help you. Nobody else is going to help you. The police made that very clear that they won't help you find her. Basically, he was it. He was my only hope of getting her back.
Lori was dazed and distraught at her daughter's disappearance. And in addition, Scott said that he was an FBI agent and nobody would know better how to find Casey than him.
It was a drive-through wedding chapel where I think you can get French fries with your marriage certificate.
For the honeymoon, Scott takes Lori up to the mountains, and it's in the Walden area, and says, you just need to relax for a day.
We went camping for our honeymoon. Colorado mountains are beautiful and just some peaceful surroundings. And he took off on his four-wheeler to go scouting for a hunting spot.
Days later, it appears that Rob and Lori McLeod's prayers have finally been answered.
When I came home, her necklace was hanging on her bedroom door, and that to everyone was a sign that she had been there. Her necklace was a gift from CB, her boyfriend. I was very happy that she was coming by, even if I wasn't there, that just knowing that she was okay.
And Scott points to that and says, there, now that is proof that she's still around. She's leaving you clues.
It's a glimmer of hope, but months pass with no other signs from Casey. With the holidays fast approaching, Lori and Rob slip back into despair.
Christmases was the mile marker, I guess, because Christmas Eve, especially at our house, ended up being a big deal. I remember the first Christmas, she's only missing a few months and wondering if she's just going to show up.
The 2003 holidays come and go, and still no Casey. Lori and Rob are left with only empty chairs at their table and a bunch of presents that were never opened.
The second Christmas was hoping she'd show up and really, really concerned that she hadn't.
It's a constant worry. Is she hungry? Does she have a coat?
And then the third Christmas, something's up. She should have shown up by now. I remember going to bed, and like 10 minutes later, it's like midnight, and the doorbell rings. And I just like flew. I remember going to bed, and like 10 minutes later, it's like midnight, and the doorbell rings. And I just like flew. And my neighbor was there, and she goes, oh, I thought I'd come let you know your garage door is open.
The fear and frustration felt by Casey's heartbroken parents, Rob and Lori McLeod, is becoming overwhelming. And then in 2006, a detective by the name of Gary Thatcher shows up.
Yes. He shows up and he says, I need to speak with Scott Kimball.
But Detective Thatcher's interest in Scott Kimball is not about Casey, but rather about a scheme that sends investigators down a rabbit hole they never imagined.
Gary Thatcher's a young detective with the Lafayette Police Department. Mostly he's dealing with white-collar crimes in this town where there's not a lot of crime.
Lafayette is just 30 minutes from Denver, but it feels like a world away from the big city.
This whole thing started with a call from a local bank about check forgery.
In 2006, Heritage Bank reported that there was a check fraud, and one of their customers had over $50,000 funneled out of his checking account.
Thatcher digs deeper into the apparent check fraud case, and it's clear someone is forging the bank customers' checks. Detective Thatcher pulls surveillance video from the bank to see who might have been cashing those forged checks. And sure enough, cameras capture a stocky Caucasian male with a goatee on numerous occasions, cashing those fraudulent checks.
Detective Thatcher saw numerous checks made out to either Rocky Mountain All Natural Beef or Rocky Mountain Cattle Company. He did some investigation and found out the owner of Rocky Mountain Natural Beef was Scott Kimball.
Scott Kimball, the same man appearing on that bank surveillance video.
We found that he lives just on the outskirts of Lafayette. Lori said that Scott had taken off and that she didn't know where he was at.
At this point, Detective Thatcher doesn't know what or who he's dealing with, and he wonders if maybe Lori is covering for her husband. So Thatcher invites her in to answer a few questions.
We were trying to decide whether or not Lori was in on this, whether she was a suspect or what was her role in this.
Any suspicions that Thatcher has about Lori's involvement? Well, they disappear when Lori drops a bombshell that alters the course of the investigation.
As we continue talking, she starts to tell me that Scott Kimball is an employee of the FBI. And so, of course, I'm like, what do you mean an employee of the FBI? Why would an employee of the FBI be stealing, $50,000+ in money from somebody?
I knew there were pieces of Scott's life that just didn't make sense.
Lori also mentions her daughter, Casey.
She believes that Scott is going to use his connections with the FBI to help find her daughter, Casey, who had gone missing in 2003. I have a suspect who's committing check fraud, finding out that he's potentially an employee of the FBI, and then now she also has a daughter that's missing.
CB swears that Scott's the one the picture of from the hotel to take her to work, and she hasn't even seen it since. And to be perfectly honest, at first I thought Scott knew where she was, and that's sort of why I kind of wanted him in my life.
There's a lot to take in, especially when you're sitting down and you're expecting to just be talking about a check fraud.
You must be wondering, is he an FBI agent or a con?
It did not make sense that he would be an FBI agent, but what Lori was telling me was conflicting with that, given that he had a laptop with an FBI seal, he had a badge, he had a gun.
Where I'm at right now is I'm just kind of gathering information from everybody, trying to kind of get a grasp as to what's going on.
He's not a violent.
Doesn't seem like he's the type of person.
But I think he might win.
Thatcher was expecting answers, but he was left with only more questions. Chief among them, is Scott Kimball actually an agent for the FBI? Or is he as phony as the checks he was allegedly cashing?
Detective Thatcher wants to check the information, of course, and he calls the FBI. He eventually gets hold of Special Agent Carl Schloff.
Carl Schloff quickly informs me that Scott is actually an informant for them, a cooperating witness.
Thatcher is surprised to learn that it's true. Kimball is working for the FBI as a paid confidential informant.
Gary Thatcher meets with Carl Schloff, the FBI handler who was handling Scott Kimball as a confidential informant.
Detective Thatcher told me he was working on a white-collar case involving Kimball, and then he asked me what I knew about Casey's disappearance.
Thatcher says, Carl, are you aware that, in fact, Kimball was the last person to see Casey McLeod alive?
I did not know that, and I told him that.
But it triggered another thought in Schloff's head to say that, well, in fact, Scott Kimball was the last one to see another woman who also disappeared in 2003.
So that basically at that time, we discussed, well, that's two women now that Kimball was last seen alive with.
Suggested that Scott was responsible for their disappearance, but we didn't know if they were alive or dead.
Investigators are now trying to connect the dots between Scott Kimball, Casey McLeod, and the disappearance of yet another woman, Jennifer Markham.
When Jennifer was growing up, she was always a happy child. She had a lot of friends. There was no other description but beautiful.
Bob Markham's nightmare begins in February of 2003 when his daughter Jennifer vanishes from a Denver suburb. And this is 6 months before Casey McLeod disappears. Johnny, describe Jennifer Markham. 25 years old, a single mom?
She was. Lived here in Denver. She lived about 20 miles south of where Casey disappeared in the heart of Denver, and had a 5-year-old named Austin.
And to support herself and her son had begun dancing at an exotic bar named Shotgun Willie's. Markham was a knockout. She was the type of woman that other strippers envied because all the men were all over her.
I didn't really like the fact that she was working there, but she was easier to make money there to try and provide a better life for her son. She took me to a coffee shop this one day where they served sandwiches and Java coffees and things. She was trying to open a place like that someday.
Before she disappears, Jennifer is dating a man named Steve Ennis.
Steve Ennis was a good-looking guy, a gym rat, the type of guy that an attractive young woman like Jennifer Markham could fall for.
This was the guy that she really loved, and she really cared about him.
Steve Ennis gets involved dealing ecstasy and gets some time. Jennifer Markham is visiting Steve Ennis in prison regularly. Eventually, however, Jennifer Markham stops showing up.
Jennifer goes silent. Her phone, any communications with family. Eventually, her 1996 green Saturn is found at Denver International Airport. But there was no record of Jennifer having ever boarded a flight at DIA.
Her car was left in February, but nobody even recovered it until June.
We kept looking, and then my wife went down to the police officer down on the corner, and she asked him if he could run a search on Jennifer, and he said he would. The following Monday, we had a voicemail from an FBI agent to call him.
That agent is Carl Schloff, who's working out of the FBI's Denver Bureau. Agent Schloff tells Bob Markham something surprising. They were already looking for Jennifer, and had been for a while.
And then we flew out to Denver to meet with the FBI and the district attorney, trying to learn as much as we could possibly learn.
Turns out Jennifer and her boyfriend Steve Ennis are somehow involved in an ongoing FBI drug investigation, and it's during that investigation that Jennifer vanishes.
And then they told me that some guy had her belongings. That didn't make sense to me whatsoever.
That guy, Agent Schloff says, is a confidential informant working for the FBI who goes by the name Joe.
So I told him we wanted to meet with this person.
And so, in the summer of 2005, Bob and his ex-wife Mary meet the informant at a park just outside Denver.
We sat down with him at a picnic table.
This informant looks Markham and his wife in the eye and says, "Your daughter is dead."
The informant tells Jennifer's parents that their daughter was killed by a drug dealer, an acquaintance of Jennifer's boyfriend, Steve Ennis.
I had a chill run down my spine, and I couldn't.
Bob Markham wants desperately to find his daughter.
He said, "I can take you up and show you where she's at."
It's up there in the mountains, and I know where she's buried. But Bob Markham's spidey sense is just going off, and he just knows that this man is bad news.
I figured if I went to the mountains, my ex-wife and I wouldn't be seen anymore.
But Mary is having a tougher time saying no.
Now, it's during this encounter at the park that Joe the informant takes Mary aside and presents her with an indecent proposal. A proposal that he says she must keep secret from her ex-husband, Bob.
He says, "If you're willing to meet with me at a local hotel,
you give me sex, then I'll tell you what happened to your daughter. And not until then." He made up his own FBI form, and he was going to have Mary fill in her name. I do authorize the informant to bind, gag me, engage in sexual activity.
Mary is staying in a separate hotel room from her ex-husband, Bob, and is actually contemplating this.
Mary even wrote a letter to be left in her hotel room. It said, if anything happens to me, I've gone with this strange man.
Why would Mary even consider meeting the informant alone?
Jennifer, by now, she's been missing for 2 years, and this FBI informant might be the key. Mary was willing to do whatever it took.
Well, then about 2 o'clock in the morning, he goes over and knocks on her door. And she looks through the peephole, and he's sitting there looking through the peephole at her.
She called Bob. She told Bob about this plan. Bob told her, if you let that guy in your room, he will kill you.
At a motel outside of Denver, Jennifer Markham's mother, Mary, is considering meeting with a mysterious FBI informant, hoping to get more information about her missing daughter. But when he shows up, Mary hesitates and calls her ex-husband, Bob.
Bob told her, if you let that guy in your room, he will kill you. He bangs and yells, saying, I know you're in there. She still does not answer. They call security, and he ends up peeling out around the parking lot and leaving the hotel.
Days later, Bob's ex-wife, Mary, calls the informant, and this time she records the conversation.
Joe.
Yeah, this is Joe.
Yeah, it's Mary.
Hey, man, what's up?
Did you really know how my daughter died?
You had your chance.
I couldn't let you perform those things on me. The only thing that means a damn thing to me is my daughter.
Some things that I think are important are classified, and I will be in huge trouble if I tell you. So I have to show you. I'll see you later. Bye-bye.
Joe.
It seems as if any leads about Jennifer's whereabouts have dried up. But when Bob met the informant in that park, he had covertly taken a picture of his license plate. It belonged to Scott Kimball.
I called up Carl Sloth, the FBI agent, and I told him this guy killed my daughter.
He felt Kimball was more involved, and I supported him on that. If she is a victim of a homicide, we have to find the body. By 2003, I'd put out all the feelers I could on Jennifer's disappearance. We interviewed countless people. We kind of had a pretty good feeling she was dead, but we didn't have anything to corroborate it.
For investigators in Colorado, what started out as a small check fraud case has exploded into something clearly larger. Little do they know, they're just getting started.
I first heard the name Scott Kimball in 2004. It was around this terrible accident where this young boy, Justin, had been severely hurt.
We've always called it an accident, but it's not an accident.
Whatever you call it, it happened back when Scott was living with Lori McLeod. His two sons, Cody and Justin, are visiting for the weekend. Justin is just 10 years old at the time.
On or about July 1st of 2004, Justin had been in the house with Lori, Scott, and his younger brother, Cody.
They were outside playing. This dad, Scott, told them to dig some holes to try to catch some of the field mice.
This was at about 10 o'clock at night. So he takes them out onto the property, which is about 5 acres or so. And then he has a shovel.
Our dad has this idea to go outside and hang out and play, which I thought was kind of cool, but I always thought it was a little weird because it was pretty late.
Dark?
Definitely dark, yeah. A lot later than any of us usually play outside.
I mean, you were 10 years old, right?
Yeah. There was this big steel grate that was usually just like laying down on the dirt, but it was propped up against a truck, which I thought was a little weird.
The cattle grate was 8 to 10 feet long, and they're guessing weighed about 300 pounds.
And he sent Cody inside, and then he told me that he wanted me to dig a hole specifically and like a spot where he pointed on the ground.
Right under the grate?
Uh-huh. He told me to dig this hole, and he said, I need you to look at the horizon and don't break your stare. Be a good soldier and do what I say.
All of a sudden, Justin says he's digging, and then he sees a bright light.
I saw a bunch of stars flashes in front of me, and then came the big wham. And I heard it hitting me.
And I remember running back out the door and I just see my dad carrying my brother. I just see blood coming from Justin, and he's in a lot of pain, and I was very scared that I don't know what's wrong with him.
Cody came outside, and I just had a huge head injury, and I could barely keep conscious, and all I was trying to tell Cody was, it's a trick.
Scott grabs Justin, throws him in the car, and starts heading to the nearest hospital. Justin is in a state of shock.
I was trying to tell him I can't breathe. I need to sit up and roll down the window, so I rolled down the window all the way. And as I'm trying to use the door to pull myself up, that's when I feel the door open. And I remember screaming, "Stop the car. Why aren't you stopping?"
How fast was it going?
Oh, at least 60 miles per hour. What I do remember him pushing me out was by my face, because I remember how big his hand was and how warm it felt on my cold face.
You went like this?
Mm-hmm.
And it pushed you out.
His whole head covered my face and pushed me out that way. I was holding on, one leg right here, one arm right here, and the other leg was right here. And I just remember screaming, telling him to stop the car, and he just kept going. I just sort of accepted the fact that I was going to die right then and there. And I let go. And I just remember thinking, this guy is going to kill me, and he's obviously making it look like an accident, and no one's going to know because I'm going to be dead.
However, according to a police report, Kimball has a very different version of the events, telling officers he was inside the house when Justin was playing on the steel grate. He told them he looked out and saw the large metal grate had fallen on top of Justin. And as for the car ride to the hospital?
Scott said I was trying to pull you back in the car, but it's an odd way to do it by putting your hand on his face instead of grabbing a coat or something. There were no brake marks at the scene, and then allegedly Scott just threw Justin back in through the window.
The police report goes on to say that at this time, we have no reason to believe there was any criminal activity involved.
I got a call on my cell phone from a hospital. "We have your son here. He's in the ER. We need you to come to the hospital."
It must have been traumatizing for you.
Yes. The surgeon came in and he said, "I just want to tell you right now, it doesn't look good."
Justin had been severely hurt, substantial brain damage.
It's been about 16 years, but to this day I still have a hard time talking about my brother. And that night, I thought I was gonna lose my brother. I've never been so scared in my life.
He was in a coma for a month, a chemically induced coma. And the whole family was standing around.
There's a police officer there. Justin regains consciousness.
And the first thing that he says is, "Why did Dad do this to me?"
Why did Dad do this to me?
Why did Dad do this to me?
The people gathered around Justin in his bed were wondering, how could a father possibly have any motive to kill his son?
And as investigators search for answers, their case is about to get a whole lot bigger. And a whole lot more terrifying.
He says, "Merry Christmas. Dig here." And boy, do we all dig.
He's in federal custody now, arrested after this wild police chase.
It's starting to dawn on you that this guy is a dangerous man.
We've got two women who've never been seen again.
These two dads show up at the FBI office saying that an informant for the FBI had murdered their daughters.
I just wanted her home. I hope and I pray all the time that God would tell me something so that I can find her.
Was Scott Kimball such a good con man that he duped even the FBI?
Kimball's nickname in prison is rather ominous. They call him Hannibal, after Hannibal Lecter from Silence of the Lambs.
You don't take a guy that's lied all of his life or told a lot of lies all his life and get him to invest the truth in it one day.
We just need to deal with the devil.
Much to everyone's surprise, Justin recovers. He's in a coma for a month, but he comes out of it.
When you woke up, what's the first thing you said?
I remember saying, my dad did it. Because I remember thinking my last thought before I lost consciousness was, no one's ever going to know that he tried to do this to me.
What in the world would motivate a father to harm, maybe even kill his 10-year-old son?
Scott stood to benefit $50,000 if Justin died.
It turns out there is a life insurance policy on his son, Justin. And just days before the accident, Kimball changed the beneficiary, removing his ex-wife, Larissa, and making himself the sole beneficiary. How did you feel about that?
To be honest, I think I threw up. Because then it all started making sense. This was no accident. We call it Justin's very bad day.
The medical personnel at the time said, given the extensive amount of brain trauma Justin had sustained, he could not actually still have independent memories of the accident that had happened.
That statement by the neurosurgeon really hurt that part of the case.
For Justin, there was a long convalescence ahead. And that's why Kimball's relative, his Uncle Terry, shows up to help.
Scott's Uncle Terry lived in Alabama. He immediately came out to Colorado to be with his great nephew and to help him through his recovery.
Uncle Terry is recently divorced, and he's coming to town with his pickup, his camper, his 2 dogs, and a briefcase full of money from his divorce.
Uncle Terry was a little creepy. Yeah, wandered around in his underwear in front of me, and yeah, he's an odd bird.
Pretty soon, Lori comes home from work one day to find Scott in their backyard cleaning a couch.
He said Uncle Terry was embarrassed because one of his dogs vomited on the couch, and he knew he had ruined it, and he didn't want to face you.
So she asked Scott, "Where did your uncle go?" And Scott says, "Oh, he won the lottery and went down to Mexico with a stripper. You're probably not going to see him for a while."
Anyway, I'm like, well, for whatever reason, Uncle Terry is no longer here, so I'm okay with that.
All these series of unfortunate events have Detective Gary Thatcher and District Attorney Katarina Booth thinking that Scott Kimball has been passing more than just a few bogus checks. Is it starting to dawn on you that this guy is a dangerous man?
Yeah, absolutely.
So Katarina and Gary filed charges that would stick, and those were the check fraud forgery charges.
Scott didn't know that I was in contact with the police at this point, and he says, no, they're trying to pin a crime on me that I didn't do, so I'm going to take off for a little while.
We were able to determine that Scott was in Southern California. We got together with the U.S. Marshals, and they were able to identify his truck, and then that's when the chase ensued.
He leads police on a 3-hour car chase. They put down spikes, he goes off-road.
39-year-old Scott Kimball captured yesterday after a 4-hour police chase.
Part of this dramatic chase even makes the news that night.
Finally, his truck begins to run out of gas. He puts up his hands and he gets down, face down on the ground.
We know he's safely in custody. What was most important is we needed to keep him in custody.
They're suspicious that Scott is involved in much more than just financial fraud, and in fact in the disappearance of several people. But they don't have any bodies. So prosecutors from Boulder County decide to devise a strategy.
Scott had enough prior felony convictions that he qualified for what we call the big bitch. Big bitch means habitual criminal.
Turns out Scott Kimball has a long rap sheet for crimes including forgery, theft, and fraud.
If someone has a rap sheet that's worth bragging about, you can eventually charge them as a habitual criminal. It can put them behind bars for decades beyond any single charge.
Kimball is behind bars, but the search continues for those two missing women.
25-year-old Jennifer Markham disappeared in February of 2003. Her parents helped erect a billboard in 2006 near the strip club where she worked as a dancer.
After we put up the billboard, I got a call from a reporter, and he was doing an article, he said, on missing girls of these clubs. We told him that we needed him to put in there that the last person that Jennifer saw was Scott Kimball.
I came across an article about a family whose daughter was missing, and I thought, okay, this sounds like what I'm experiencing. And it mentions, just out of the blue, that the last person she had been seen with was Scott Kimball. And then I just thought, oh, crap.
Rob McLeod and Bob Markham are part of a club that nobody wants to join. They're fathers of adult women who have gone missing, and both were last seen with a guy named Scott Kimball.
Rob reaches out to Bob, and soon they meet, bound by the tragedy they share. How many years had your daughters been missing when you met each other?
I believe about 2 years. I felt I was like living in a nightmare or in kind of a haze. And when I met Bob, he was like the pit bull, really focused.
I asked him if he could call Lori, his ex-wife, and see if I could talk to her. I asked her, do you know anybody else that is missing? And she said, yeah. Now that you said that, Uncle Terry.
He says, we're going to the FBI tomorrow. I said, we are?
He dragged
you? Do you just go there?
He said he basically dragged you to the FBI office.
Yes.
Rob McLeod and Bob Markham come into the FBI office in November 2006. Both Rob and Bob tell my boss that our informant, Scott Kimball, took their daughters.
The FBI have an informant linked to two missing women. They realize that they are in really hot water here.
We were trying to keep the FBI from not only having egg on its face, but right the wrongs that had happened to these families that we didn't even know was happening. Number one in the FBI is don't embarrass the Bureau. That goes with any job you take. Rob McLeod and Bob Markham come into the FBI office in November 2006. Both tell my boss that our informant, Scott Kimball, took their daughters.
After hearing from these two fathers, the FBI assigned Special Agent Johnny Grusing to look into Scott Kimball.
We didn't know how bad the mess was going to be when I was brought in.
Grusing looks into Kimball's history as a career criminal. Theft, bank fraud, bad checks, and while there was no history of violent crimes, he did serve time in prison.
While he was in prison back in 2002, Kimball's cellmate is a guy named Steve Ennis.
Now, if that name sounds familiar, it's because Ennis was Jennifer Markham's boyfriend around the time she disappeared. Ennis tells Kimball that Jennifer is a stripper, but that she desperately wants a way out. And Kimball, he seems only too willing to lend a helping hand. Steve Ennis is facing drug charges, and there are key witnesses who will testify against him in his case. An opportunistic Kimball then sets a plan in motion to con Ennis.
Because he's soon to be released from prison, Kimball tells Ennis that he'll take care of the witnesses. And not only that, he'll help set up his girlfriend Jennifer Markham in a legitimate business, just as she always wanted.
Scott says, hey, listen, when I get out, I can set up Jennifer in this legit business. It's a coffee shop.
But it's all a setup. Kimball turns around, goes to the FBI, and he throws Ennis under the bus.
Kimball now tells the authorities that his cellmate Steve Ennis has put out a hit on the outside and that he can help stop the murder plot.
Not only does Scott Kimball claim that Steve Ennis wants to kill witnesses, Kimball says Ennis is going to use his girlfriend, Jennifer Markham, to get the job done. This information winds up with FBI Special Agent Carl Schloff, who had reason to believe that it was true.
Kimball had information on prisoners or inmates who were plotting to kill witnesses, federal witnesses.
Carl believed that Scott was going to save lives, and he needed to be an informant when he was released. He had been an informant before for the FBI in Alaska, prior to even coming here to Denver.
So his previous work had panned out.
At that time, yes.
There was reason to believe he was pretty good.
Yes.
His information was good.
Yes.
The FBI has a long history of using informants. But who better to catch a crook than a crook?
As a boss once told me, there are no swans in the sewer.
Scott Kimball gets out of federal prison in late December of 2002.
Once he got out, he was under Carl's supervision.
So that leaves you to watch over Scott Kimball.
As much as you can. I mean, we don't live with the person, but when you say watch over, it's not the only case we're working on. How about that?
His job is to check in once in a while, give him some money, give him some recording equipment, and see what information he can get on his own.
And it's not long before he's making contact with Jennifer Markham.
So then you sanction a meeting, right, between Kimball and Jennifer Markham?
Yes.
What was the plan?
The plan was to try to corroborate his information. He says that people in this drug conspiracy wanted to kill witnesses. So he offered to, as an informant, to wear a wire.
Kimball wears a wire in these meetings, but despite his promises to the FBI, Jennifer never says anything about wanting to kill witnesses, and there's nothing to charge Ennis with.
And then February 17th, her phone goes dead.
And that is the last anyone ever hears from Jennifer Markham.
In the weeks after Jennifer's disappearance, Carl Schloff is beginning to wonder what exactly happened to her.
Did Scott Kimball say what happened to her? To Jennifer?
He first told us that Jennifer was dead.
Dead?
Yes.
Did you press him for details?
Oh, yes.
Kimball tells Schloff he knows who killed Jennifer, but he doesn't give an exact location of where her body may be.
She was last seen alive in Colorado Springs. Her car was found abandoned at Denver International Airport. That's another jurisdiction. Kimball had said her body was dumped in Rifle, Colorado. So we didn't really have an agency that was going to take the lead on the case because it wasn't enough for them to investigate based upon those circumstances.
Schloff says the FBI kept working on it, but without a body, the Jennifer Markham case stalls.
When Scott was let out of prison, he basically had 1 year to prove his worth as an FBI informant. He was basically running free for a year. But after a year, since nothing was provided, Carl basically was moved away from the case, and a different case agent came, and the Jennifer thing was starting to basically die on the vine.
Nobody saw a big picture of who Scott Kimball was. It wasn't until we started really looking at his criminal history and piecing things together that we could see that each individual agency had no idea what they were really dealing with.
But in 2007, Gary Thatcher, Johnny Grusing, and Katarina Booth are starting to connect the dots.
We've got two women who've never been seen again, who both were last known to be with Scott Kimball. That is not a coincidence.
It doesn't just end with Jennifer Markham, it doesn't end with Casey. We find out from Lori that Scott Kimball's uncle Terry was also missing.
I was able to get a search warrant for Scott's laptop.
And what they find there is a photograph of a young woman.
There were two pictures of a girl. One she had dark hair, one she had blonde hair.
They are concerned, given Kimball's history, she might have met the same fate as Casey McLeod and Jennifer Markham.
And at long last, Kimball will be questioned about those missing women, face to face.
If you're asking me if I know where Jennifer or Casey is, the answer is no.
As Kimball sits in jail facing some 48 years on habitual offenses, Special Agent Johnny Grusing and Detective Gary Thatcher meet him face to face.
You see, this guy is a murderer, but right now, you just have missing people. You have missing Uncle Terry, missing Jennifer, missing Casey. Those aren't homicides until you prove them.
This was one of our first interviews with Scott, now that we've had time to put more pieces together.
Gary and I sit down, I interview myself as the FBI, and then he tells me he wants a pizza. And then I said, well, we'll get one at a break. He goes, no, I'll have one right now. And I'm like, well, I wonder who's in charge here. So we ordered him a pizza.
I'm trying to help you. Whether you see it as me wanting to help you or not, I am.
Scott was a 10 on narcissistic behavior. I knew that he would not talk with me if I did not appease that narcissistic side of him first.
You don't take a guy that's lied all of his life or told a lot of lies all of his life and get him to invest the truth in one day or a few hours. It just doesn't happen.
Talking with Scott, it wears you out. I mean, he'll talk for hours and hours and hours. If you let him go, he'll go 10 hours.
If we can get to the bottom of what happened to Jennifer and Casey, we're pretty convinced that you had something to do with their disappearances. You're the last one known to be with both of them. We've interviewed...
I disagree.
That's pretty much the case. And I know you can disagree.
You can put it however you want to.
It was clear he was denying everything, and he wasn't giving us anything.
You're going to say what you're going to say, because only you know the truth, Scott.
Yes, I do know the truth.
Okay. And we don't know the truth. And that's what you've got going for you now. You have that knowledge we don't have.
Gary Thatcher and Johnny Grusing are getting nowhere with Kimball. Despite being behind bars, he's not giving an inch. But they catch a break when they start showing around the photograph of the young woman from Kimball's computer. Another former cellmate of Kimball's from way back in 2002, Stephen Holly, knows exactly who she is.
And he sees this photograph and says, oh yeah, that's my ex-girlfriend. That's a young woman named Leanne Emery. Leanne Emery is a young woman who, like Jennifer Markham and Casey McLeod, is a woman who's fallen on hard times.
She ends up in this relationship with Stephen Holly. Holly is in federal prison and ends up being roommates with Scott Kimball.
Stephen Holly told Kimball that he was looking for a way to escape prison, and he had a plan in mind that would involve his girlfriend on the outside, Leanne Emery, to help him execute it.
Again, it's just classic Scott. Manipulate whoever he's with, no matter where he's at. He tells Stephen Holly, I'll help you break out.
And Kimball offered to take care of his girlfriend when he got out.
Another girlfriend of his cellmate that he's going to take care of.
He was promising Steve Holly that he would break him out of prison and reunite him with Leanne in Mexico.
Stephen Holly tells Leanne she needs to connect with his soon-to-be-released fellow inmate. He tells her his name is Hannibal, and that she just needs to trust Hannibal.
Kimball's nickname in prison is rather ominous. They call him Hannibal, after Hannibal Lecter from Silence of the Lambs.
A census taker once tried to test me. I ate his liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti.
Maybe a little bit of insight into his psyche about, who he was as a person.
7 days after Kimball's release from prison, he made his first contact with Leanne Emery.
And of course, once Kimball gets released, he just double-crossed Steve Holly.
Scott reports to the FBI that Steve Holly's trying to escape, and he gives the details of the escape plan, but he takes himself out of it.
Instead of helping him get out of prison, he squeals on him to the authorities, gets Stephen Holly thrown into solitary confinement so that Stephen can't communicate at all
But Leanne still believes Hannibal is there to help.
Now, Leanne Emery is completely isolated even from her boyfriend in prison. And that's when Scott closes the circle around her and takes her on a trip.
So Scott tells Leanne, we've got to do these check frauds and thefts and stuff in order to get money for this big escape plot where they're gonna break out Steve and Holly and they're gonna go to Mexico.
While Leanne is on this journey with Scott Kimball, she writes some emails to her cousin, and she is so frightened that she's not willing to share a lot of information with her cousin.
She writes, my orders come from Hannibal, and he's a dangerous person. If Hannibal knew I was talking to you, he'd have me killed in a second.
So they do go on this little crime spree for a couple weeks before then he takes her out to the Book Cliffs of Utah.
And Leanne is never heard from again.
Now that authorities are aware that Leanne Emery is likely a victim of Scott Kimball, they can see that this has become quite a list of people. Casey McLeod, Jennifer Markham, Terry Kimball. Now Leanne Emery is added to that list.
So we needed to figure out how to hold something over Scott's head. We had no leverage.
And when all else fails, these investigators have to come to grips with the fact that they may only have one option left.
So this is the turning point in our entire investigation.
We just made a deal with the devil.
I remember sleepless nights that went on for months. And I remember Bruce telling us, don't live in the place of thinking this is going to be a happy ending. It probably isn't. Okay, what do I pray for now? I don't care if it was a fingernail. That's what I kept praying for. I just wanted her home.
We're trying to figure out how do we get something on Scott where we can convince him to cooperate with us. We had no leverage with Scott. You can spend 8 hours talking to Scott Kimball, and you might come out with 5 seconds worth of really good information.
And sure enough, during one of these tenacious interrogations, Kimball blurts out something which, intentionally or not, gives the investigators the first glimmer of hope they've been waiting for.
Scott tells us, what if one of these girls could be found on National Forest land?
Kimball seems to be asking if a missing girl's body is found on federal property. Would that mean he could serve out his time in a federal prison?
Scott was trying to get time in federal prison because it's easier life for him than in state prison. When Scott said National Forest land, we already knew he went hunting on the day Casey disappeared.
Johnny Grusing remembers that when he first conducted a search of Scott Kimball's belongings, he recovered a receipt from a grocery store in Walden, Colorado. Walden is surrounded by National Forest land.
I figured she hadn't been recovered up there, but I went ahead and called the National Forest Service and said, I've got a receipt up in Walden. Do you have any missing people? So I was just following up on a lead that was probably a 1 out of 1,000. They finally put me through to someone who said, yeah, they recovered a hiker right before winter in the middle of nowhere. And it was a female, but they didn't think it was a homicide.
This hunter saw off in the distance something glinting in the sun. He didn't know what it was. He felt like he should at least go check it out. And when he did, he found a skull lying on the ground.
Based upon what Scott had said, based upon the receipt, based upon the godforsaken place this hiker was recovered, I had a really good notion it was Casey. Gary and I drove up the next morning to meet with the sheriff. I went and recovered all the skeletal remains, sent them to our lab, tested them against Lori's DNA, and it came back as Casey.
This is the turning point in our entire investigation. And now we had the body, and we had Casey here, and we were able to get her back to her family.
The FBI calls and says, hey, we need to have a meeting. You know, there's been some newer developments. When I had given up, she'd been found. Somebody had picked her up, taken care of her. And now she's come home.
We took our whole evidence response team up to that hillside, and we walked up and down until we recovered every piece, every bone of Casey that we could. And Lori and Rob went with us.
But there's something else. Lori had been here before. It's where Scott Kimball had taken her on their honeymoon. And that was only weeks after he had left her body there.
He killed your daughter at the place you went on your honeymoon.
Yes.
With him.
Yes. It was like a punch in the stomach. He wanted to check on the status of her remains, I'm sure. I thought we were just camping, and that's in fact where Casey was.
Lori would eventually have her marriage to Scott Kimball annulled.
It's tough to prove a homicide when you don't have the body. And now we had the body and we had Casey here. This was the moment in the case where Johnny and I really knew that now we had Scott.
We're getting that momentum. We might be able to file a homicide case. And I think Scott knows those things are shifting. Defense comes to us and says, should we talk about a deal?
He knew the gig was up. He knew a homicide charge was coming. It was clear to him that he was not getting out of prison.
We had Casey, but we didn't have Jennifer, Leanne, or Terry. And the deal would be, are these families willing to give up prison time that Scott might serve for him to tell us where their bodies are? But we had spoken with the families. They wanted their girls home.
We started negotiating terms of a deal with Scott. And as a part of that, it would be to sit down with us and start figuring out how do we locate these other bodies.
Scott Kimball's going to lead us to the bodies in exchange for some reduced charges from first-degree murder down to second-degree murder.
And for that, he would get 48 years in prison.
He definitely wants to take the deal. Scott wanted to avoid any kind of a death penalty.
We're finally going to sit down, and Scott's going to tell us, where are we going? Where are we going to be finding Jennifer and Terry and Leanne? What kinds of things are we going to need?
Scott started laying out we needed to go to Utah. He was almost giddy or excited. He's like, you guys need helicopters, we need four-wheelers.
And I'll just never forget Scott just loving himself in that limelight. And then I remember looking at the jail deputies. I said, we just made a deal with the devil. And then we get out to this area, and it's vast and it's huge. He walks over, and he taps his foot. He says, Merry Christmas, dig here. And boy, did we all dig. And we dug and dug and dug.
Prosecutors have just made a deal with the devil. And that devil agrees to lead investigators to the remains of Leanne, Uncle Terry, and Jennifer.
Our plan was to collect both Leanne and Jennifer in the first day. He said this will be a piece of cake.
I thought by the end of the day, we were going to have Jennifer and Leanne. Like, I'm just pumped with excitement.
You got 9 big black SUVs headed out to the mountains.
We had a big convoy of multiple FBI vehicles.
SWAT team, evidence response team, the local sheriffs, his defense attorneys, Gary and Katarina and her crew. So we had 40 people out there.
People are stopping and pausing, thinking like the president's rolling through town.
It was all about him, and you could tell that he really enjoyed that.
They cross from Colorado into Utah and enter a remote, rugged area called the Book Cliffs.
It's just this huge wall of kind of mountain, foothill-y-ish, and they go forever.
You just get a feeling like it's forsaken land. You don't see people, you don't hear wildlife. It's dirt and dust and heat.
They go through washes and gullies at Kimball's direction to the burial site that Kimball says he had left his victims.
He kept pointing to different creeks and saying it could be this one, could be this one. And our team kept digging and finding nothing.
We would all meet every morning, and Scott would then start taking us out into the wilderness.
And in that second or third trip, he walks over and he taps his foot. He says, "Merry Christmas. Dig here." And boy, do we all dig. Every single one of us, including me, we're all digging on this one spot. And we dug and dug and dug. No, Jennifer Markham.
And this wild goose chase plays out day after day, search after futile search.
We ran those book cliffs up and down, and we did not find them.
On day 7, Kimball directs the team to a dry creek bed.
And as we're walking down here, he points to the right and says, "There's a bone." And there was a bone. It didn't look human. But he said, "Okay, well, I think we're in the wrong place. Let's turn around and go the other way."
It was really odd behavior. And so Johnny decided he was going to stay back and kind of search that area a little bit more.
And so I started walking up here. And eventually I found a hair clip. And it's got brown and blonde hair in it. So I said I'd found Leanne. And my voice was cracking a little bit.
I remember going and picking some flowers and bringing them back and just laying them in that spot. There wasn't a dry eye in the house. That day and the whole next day, we recovered Leanne. It was a very painstakingly slow process.
Where her cranium should have been, there was a spent .40 caliber round, which we traced back to Scott's handgun. After we did not find Jennifer, but we found Leanne, we said he's in violation of the plea agreement and we're going to trial. So Scott said, "I'll give you a map where Terry was."
Now, Scott actually drew this map.
He did. He drew the precise exit. He provides a key down here.
Kimball told them that they would find a gray tarp and a rope between some trees, and that's where he left Terry's body. But this time, detectives searched without Scott Kimball.
We refused to take him when we went for Uncle Terry, given the manipulation and the nonsense that we went through out of the book cliffs.
We followed this logging road, John, and we found the exact tree that he said Uncle Terry would be beside.
And we're able to find Terry Kimball wrapped up in a tarp.
Scott had tied him up in a rope and just flung him over like a piece of trash. When the anthropologists put him back together again, they found that he had been shot in the back of the head.
The search continues for at least one victim, Jennifer Markham.
I hope and I pray all the time that God would tell me something so that I can find her. Evidence or something, whatever it takes.
Now, since Kimball didn't lead authorities to all 4 victims, his plea deal is renegotiated. 2 counts of second-degree murder, one of them for Leanne, Casey, and Jennifer, and the second count for Uncle Terry, together carrying a 70-year prison sentence.
The sentence he has is probably longer than his natural life would be, so sometimes good enough is as good as you can get.
Today, Kimball took responsibility for the murders of 4 people.
But even so, there were still some surprises. Kimball entered the courtroom in a wheelchair.
The courtroom in Boulder was filled with relatives of the victims.
I did go to the hearing, and everyone told him how they felt about what he had done.
I was present right there the very first moment she took her first breath. Scott Kimball was there to take her last.
Hearing from all the families that he hurt, that was hard.
My daughter was a young woman with feelings and dreams, and to treat her like trash is despicable.
And Kimball remains unmoved throughout all of it.
He is a monster with no conscience and should be treated as such.
This man should never be free again.
You never had your day in court?
No.
Can you forgive him?
No.
He's unforgivable. And he's exactly where he belongs.
After Scott Kimball's sentencing, he's sent to Sterling Correctional Facility in Sterling, Colorado.
But you know what? That's not where Scott Kimball's story ends.
Even behind bars, he's still plotting schemes.
I was supposed to come in with a helicopter and get you. I said, it's a done deal. I'll be coming in. Hot.
Scott Kimball's cons don't stop even after he's sentenced to 7 decades in prison. 8 years later, he's plotting an elaborate helicopter prison escape from the Sterling Correctional Facility in Colorado.
I was stuck in a cell with him and went from that to a great escape.
So, this guy is Jimmy Tanksley. He was the one who had been hired by Scott to hijack the helicopter and fly it into the prison.
I was supposed to come in with a helicopter and get him.
But instead, Jimmy Tanksley begins working with the FBI, and he tells Kimball their escape plan is rock solid.
I said, it's a done deal. I'll be coming in. Fine.
And the day of this great escape comes Scott out to the yard, looking up, just waiting for that helicopter to come.
It never showed.
And so now, the con man is the one who gets conned, at least this time, and he pleads guilty to the escape attempt.
He's never gonna stop scheming.
Scott will never stop.
Lessons learned the hard way for former Special Agent Carl Sloth, whose one-time confidential informant committed unspeakable crimes. Was Scott Kimball such a good con man that he duped even the FBI?
He duped me. The FBI has to make deals with criminals all the time. And law enforcement does, to catch other criminals.
But they're valuable.
They're valuable. Sometimes they have evil intent and we get conned.
Were you reprimanded by the FBI for your handling of this?
Yes.
Scott Kimball?
Yes. My files were gone through and administratively I found some things were lacking.
What did they say was lacking?
It was more in regards to paperwork. It was never an admonishment that we should use him as an informant.
Some of the families of the victims hold you responsible.
Yeah.
Should that responsibility fall on you?
No, it falls on Kimball. I certainly understand it, though.
You do?
They've lost loved ones. And we didn't have the evidence to arrest on those 4 persons until Agent Grusing and Detective Thatcher got involved and connected all the dots.
We reached out to the FBI, who declined comment on this case. But former Special Agent Grusing tells us they've made adjustments as to how they deal with informants.
The FBI has looked at it as how best practices and lessons learned from handling informants.
How many other victims do you think are out there that Scott Kimball killed?
If I were to give you a number today, I would say somewhere between 21 and upwards of 40 some.
We may never really know.
No.
The search continues for at least one other victim, Jennifer Markham.
Scott was talking to me and he said that you'll never find your daughter. And so far, he's done what he said. I'm not letting this go. That is a fact. Hopefully, I can find her.
And then there's Scott Kimball's son, Justin, who still suffers, not just from his injuries, but also from knowing that he's the child of a serial killer. How do you come to grips with that?
It was definitely really hard at first. Just saying out loud, my dad is a convicted serial killer.
Justin, Cody, and myself, we survived. We're the lucky ones. There are others out there that aren't. We're here.
I'm really confident that I'll be able to do something with my life after this.
Casey did serve her purpose on this planet. Her purpose was to catch him. And by finding her remains, it all came together. So it wasn't the destiny I had hoped for my daughter, but God has her and nobody can ever hurt her again.
And we should point out tonight that Scott Kimball is currently in a Kentucky prison and not eligible for parole until the year 2054, when
when he's 87 years old. That is our program for tonight. Thanks for watching. I'm David Muir, and from all of us here at 2020 and ABC News, good night.
A stunning end to one of the most bizarre cases we've ever covered.
So this was someone who had a purpose in mind and took time to disguise themselves.
The clown pulls out a gun and fires at point-blank range to Marlene's face.
The last words I heard my mother say was, "Oh, how pretty," and bang.
Then you add this costume, this clown costume to it, and it just sort of created a whole bizarreness around it.
It's ridiculous. This stuff should not happen.
You can hear her gasp. It was just like shock after shock after shock.
Marlene Warren really liked clowns.
Here is a set of 3 clowns. Marlene painted it when she was a teenager.
There aren't just random evil clowns walking around unless it's in the movies.
The clown costume is a perfect costume to commit a crime in.
It's literally walking camouflage.
A woman was shot at her front door by a person dressed in a clown costume, and my heart dropped.
They're smiling and performing now. In a split second, they could wipe off that paint of a smile and be killers.
Wellington, Florida is just a very muddied, sleepy part of South Florida. It's right up against the Everglades.
Wellington is one of the richest cities in Palm Beach County.
You've got Palm Beach, which is the Tony Island of millionaires and billionaires.
It's also home to Mar-a-Lago, President Trump's so-called Winter White House.
And then you have Wellington. You've got the Wellington of the equestrian set, where Bruce Springsteen has a house. Quiet, but lavish. The houses were built around a grass airstrip, and they all had hangars out back for the owner's planes.
Now this is the way to go to work every day.
What we call Sunday sundown.
So you take this out every day?
I take it about 2 to 3 days a week when I go to the office, which is 50 miles.
I just love that idea. You fly to the office.
Fly to the office.
Wellington was nirvana. We're outside of what used to be Marlene and Michael Warren's home.
It was Memorial Day weekend. It was a normal South Florida day, hot and humid.
Marlene and Michael Warren had been married nearly 20 years. She was a working mom enjoying a morning at home with her son Joey and 3 of his friends.
I was 21 at the time. I was into a lot of things, scuba diving, flying. Life was an adventure. It was exciting. When this happened, it was all taken away.
Marlene was cooking breakfast for her son Joe and his friends who were here at the house.
And this Chrysler LeBaron pulls up to Marlene Warren's driveway.
And out gets somebody dressed like a clown, full curly orange wig, red bulb nose, white face makeup, big suit, the whole deal, and approaches the door with 2 foil balloons and a basket of red and white carnations.
The clown walked to the door, and then Marlene answered the door.
Clown hands her balloons and some flowers.
I'll still remember this to this day. One of the balloons said, "You're the greatest."
Last words I heard my mother say was, "Oh, how pretty." And bang.
The clown pulls out a gun and fires at point-blank range to Marlene's face.
It felt like slow motion. I saw her fall. Then I jumped into action. I got to the door and I saw that she's been shot. She was gasping for air.
Everybody in the house was paralyzed from shock, and that gave the clown the time to get back into the car and take off.
I had my dog out for a walk. As I walked along, I heard what sounded to me like a nail gun. Some very excited young people came running out saying they've shot Joey's mother.
I ran for the car to try to chase the vehicle. I had to catch who did this, you know. I didn't even use the road. I just drove right through property. I couldn't catch up to the car.
They rush Marlene to the hospital. She's bleeding from her mouth. She has bone and metal embedded in her tongue. When police go to the scene that morning, it's a chaotic situation. Police immediately put out a bolo, be on the lookout for the white Chrysler LeBaron getaway car. The investigation begins.
The individuals inside of the home became of paramount importance at that time. Are they able to give us a description? What details are they able to give us?
I was trying to see everything I possibly could to identify color, skin, whatever. I could not. The only thing I could concentrate on there is the eyes. I saw the clown's eyes when they got in the car. They were brown.
Joey would later talk about the incident on a local radio show.
Could you tell by their gait or by their mannerisms whether the person was a man or a woman?
Well, to me, it seemed like a man. The big hands and the size of the person.
From the South Florida Sun Sentinel in association with Wondery, this is Felonious Florida, the podcast that leads you into the dark side of the Sunshine State. I'm your host, David Schutz.
This is a case that has been both fascinating and confounding to true crime enthusiasts for decades now. It was even the topic of a hit podcast called The Killer Clown of Wellington. David Schutz was one of the podcast producers.
Marlene Warren spent the bulk of her childhood on her grandfather's farm in a little town north of Detroit.
She was the middle of three sisters.
She was a great mother. She was a person of love, a good wife. I mean, she was just all around the American mother.
Surely this has got to be the most recent photograph of Marlene that we've got.
Marlene was outstanding. Friendly, loving, kindness, do anything for anybody.
Always courteous, always respectful.
She married extraordinarily young, and by the time she was 18, she already had 2 young children.
And then a tragedy. Marlene's first husband suddenly dies, and at 20 years old, she's a widow with 2 young children.
Not long after Marlene is widowed, she meets her next husband, Michael Warren.
We had a pretty good relationship. He became a father figure for me and my brother, and a good husband for my mother.
They relocate to South Florida to go and make a new start.
Marlene was kind of like America's mom. Always cheery and smiley, always trying to put a good foot forward.
Nobody had a bad thing to say about her. It doesn't make sense that a person that seemed to be so kind and so genuine that everybody genuinely loved had this enemy out there that nobody knew about who would commit a crime like this.
The morning of the attack, Michael Warren headed off to Miami to go to a racetrack.
He left for the racetrack with his friend somewhere around 10 o'clock.
And they were midway to Miami when they got the news that Marlene Warren had been shot.
So he turns around and heads straight for the hospital where Marlene is clinging to life on life support.
Ballistic evidence is limited because there's a single projectile inside of Marlene Warren. There is no shell casing, there is no firearm. What is of value are the 2 balloons and the flower basket that sits right at the front doorstep. That really became the focal point of the evidence inside the home.
But who would make such a deadly delivery? Police are about to get a first-hand description from costume shop workers who might have come face to face with the killer.
I need to buy a costume, and I said, can you come back tomorrow? We're closed. And now I need to get a costume tonight.
There aren't just random evil clowns walking around unless it's in the movies. So this was someone who had a purpose in mind and took time to disguise themselves. Who drove way out of their way to commit a terrible crime. And then afterwards had a plan to escape.
Authorities in Palm Beach County want to know just how 40-year-old Marlene Warren, who is married and moneyed, becomes the victim of a would-be killer clown. But nobody wants those answers more than her parents.
I come in here and I think of her.
Marlene Warren really liked clowns.
You go to a circus, you always say, oh, look at that one.
In a kind of eerie coincidence, Marlene even had a clown-themed room in her childhood home.
She liked the clowns when she was a little girl. Here is a set of 3 clowns.
Her mom had a painting that Marlene had done.
This picture here is a painting of a clown. Marlene painted it when she was a teenager, and I'll keep her forever.
In some ways, the clown costume is a perfect costume to commit a crime in.
It's literally walking camouflage.
So you have these giant eyes, and there's grease paint, there's fright wigs.
I, Georgie, am Pennywise, the dancing clown.
For years, we've been a culture kind of terrified of clowns. From the 2-part blockbuster Stephen King series, It, to the panic that gripped the country in 2016 when creepy clown sightings were popping up all over the country.
This clown was caught on video along a dirt road in Ocala.
The other thing that makes people uneasy around clowns is, in a split second, they could wipe off that paint of a smile and be killers.
By most accounts, this probably would have been yet another tragic shooting. But then you add this costume, this clown costume to it, and it just sort of created a whole bizarreness around it.
That's what really put it over the top.
The only evidence that they had at the crime scene were the balloons and the flowers that were left behind.
Police start canvassing the whole area for any places that sell these foil balloons, these baskets of carnations, trying to figure out who possibly did this.
Let's find out where this flower arrangement could have been purchased, where these balloons could have been purchased.
There were 2 balloons. One of them was an unusual balloon, believe it or not. And it was only sold at one of the Publix grocery stores in Palm Beach County.
It was a red heart-shaped balloon saying, "You're the greatest."
Investigators followed up on several leads, one of which took them here to this Publix. There was a clerk here who said she remembered selling the exact basket of flowers and balloons that were found at the crime scene to someone here.
They were like, we think we know who the killer might be because we saw that person coming by. The same exact stuff you're talking about 90 minutes before the murder.
Detectives tried to locate the clown costume in the very same fashion they tried to locate these balloons and these flowers. What costume shops have, sold clown costumes in the past week or so?
I received a phone call from a detective from the sheriff's department, and he asked me whether we rented clown costumes or sold them.
The owner of a costume shop in West Palm Beach told police that 2 of her employees sold a customer a clown suit just a couple of days before the shooting.
You had closed? You had locked the door?
Right.
And then what?
I need to buy a costume, and I said, can you come back tomorrow? We're closed. And now I really need this tonight. I need to get a costume tonight.
The urgency might be understandable if it was Halloween, but remember, this is May.
The person was extremely persistent in wanting to get inside. I need to purchase this, I need to purchase this, I need to purchase this. They said, okay, we can make this happen really fast. They were very quick in making their selections.
A Ruby's clown costume, clown wig, Bob Kelly clown makeup, and a sponge nose.
They didn't buy anything that was expensive. They really bought the cheapest stuff that they had. What stuck out to the 2 ladies is that the person said, I need to have extra white makeup to cover the face completely. So the person was certainly concerned with anybody being able to see their face.
When asked what the person looked like, Deborah Offord used an interesting word, androgynous.
Rather tall, I'd say probably around 5'8", brown eyes. I remember thinking you really couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman.
What also stuck out to the ladies was that the person was not interested in buying clown feet. They sold this individual a clown wig, a clown costume, makeup with extra white, but no clown feet.
This is a red flag for detectives because the clown who shot Marlene was not wearing typical clown shoes, as Joey had mentioned in that radio interview.
Okay, were they wearing clown shoes or were they wearing civilian shoes?
Something like an army boot.
But it didn't look like it was part of the clown outfit.
Right.
After being peppered with all kinds of questions from a detective, the costume shop owners finally asked, what is this about?
I said, could I ask, please, what this is in reference to? And he said, well, you're probably going to read about it all over the papers tomorrow morning, but a woman was shot at her front door. By a person dressed in a clown costume. And he shot her in the face. And my heart dropped.
But soon enough, there'd be the first big break in this case.
They found a white Chrysler LeBaron. Observable even to the naked eye are what appear to be red-orange wig fibers.
Are the secrets to Marlene Warren's murder hidden in that white Chrysler LeBaron?
Marlene Warren was shot in her home in Wellington, Florida, at a point-blank range by a lone assailant dressed as a clown. The clown then left the scene in a white Chrysler LeBaron. Everybody's been chasing them ever since.
She didn't deserve this. She was a very caring, honest, loving, kind person, and for this to happen, it was so tragic.
Marlene died on Memorial Day 1990.
I held her hand the whole day, hoping if I felt something that we would not have to unplug that machine. But there was no hope. That was the hardest thing that my grandmother had to do, to tell them to turn that machine off.
Her funeral was held about a week later, and the investigators were there at the funeral, taking pictures, keeping track of who was in attendance.
Investigators were watching to see how people acted and what they did.
Usually when a spouse is killed, especially when it's in their home, it's almost always the spouse
So it's no surprise when police take interest in Marlene's grieving husband, Michael Warren, who had told them he was on the way to Miami with friends on the day of the murder.
Even though Mike Warren had an alibi, he is the husband, and so naturally police are going to be looking at him as having potential involvement. Mike Warren had been selling cars in South Florida for a number of years, and by 1990, he was running a lot called Bargain Motors.
It was one of those places that you went if you had really bad credit and you needed something to drive.
And it was used cars, rent-a-wrecks, that kind of business.
He was more of a blue-collar guy. People said he wasn't very educated. He looked like he had had a rough life.
He was very hardworking. He'd arrive at the lot early. He'd leave late. He was a good salesman. Very charismatic guy.
Michael Warren is a confidence man. He is smooth, okay? And that's not a compliment. Bargain Motors really takes off, and that becomes his main source of income.
Suzanne Gould was an office manager on Michael's car lot, and she told us a lot about Michael.
His smile was possessing. If you've ever met a salesman on a car lot and just felt completely like that was the most honest person, he had an air of confidence.
Those who knew Michael Warren say trouble seemed to follow him everywhere.
His plane disappeared once, and it shows up somewhere with a broken engine. Nobody knows what happened. He had racehorses at one point, and one horse shows up dead. He was that kind of guy.
He always seemed to have a different side to him.
Suspicious side?
Just different.
While Mike was managing his car lot, his wife Marlene was doing okay too in her own right, owning a slew of rental properties on the rougher side of town.
Marlene primarily operated a lot of rental properties in the Westgate area.
She had a bunch of apartments. She would collect rent. She had it really organized.
They end up amassing about 17 different pieces of property in Palm Beach County.
In fact, that's one of the early leads authorities investigate, that maybe one of Marlene's angry tenants shot her.
She managed a number of different rental properties, so it may have been suggested at some point, maybe it's a disgruntled renter. No viable suspect that was linked to a disgruntled tenant was ever developed.
What kind of reputation did they have in the community?
They were just hard workaday people that wanted to create a good lifestyle for their family.
From the outside looking in, everything may have seemed pretty normal. But this marriage, like most, wasn't exactly picture perfect.
Michael does spend a lot of time at A Bargain Motors, which causes, strain on the relationship between the two of them.
Michael was home less and less, and it seemed like their relationship was really kind of on its last legs.
But with so many financial entanglements, divorce was out of the question.
If there was ever to be a divorce, it would have been a complicated one.
Of all of the things that the Warrens owned, the big house in Wellington, all the rental properties.
If she were to pass away, then he would be the beneficiary.
In the days following Marlene's death, her stepdad, Bill, has a gut feeling about his son-in-law, that he's hiding something.
I says, Mike, I don't think that you done it. But I know pretty damn well that you know more about it than you're letting out. And he says, honest, Bill, he says, I don't know. And then we changed subject.
Suspicions are one thing, but none of it proves Michael Warren is connected to the murder.
Michael proclaims his innocence, and he even goes on a local radio show to defend himself.
At what point did the investigators start pointing the finger at you being involved in some way?
I would say right away.
4 days after the shooting, police get a huge break.
I remember hearing that on the police scanner, a lot of very excited activity by the law enforcement agencies.
The getaway car.
Yeah. It was a couple of workers that had noticed that there was a car that had just been sitting in the parking lot, and Nobody had gone in or out of it. It hadn't moved, and it just looked suspicious.
They go there, and it's a white Chrysler LeBaron, a sure match to the getaway car. They seal off the car, crime scene tape, and the whole deal, and get a search warrant so that they can tow it away and give it a search.
Whenever you get the getaway vehicle, it's a big find. You just scour it for any evidence.
Observable even to the naked eye are what appear to be red-orange wig fibers that are easily identifiable as something that may be on a wig of some type. They don't look natural.
When police seize the car, they find curly orange fibers in the front seat, in the back seat, and in the driver's door.
Those items are sent out to the FBI for fiber analysis. The results were that it's not natural, it's an acrylic, it's a man-made fiber. Can't say that these particular fibers came from any particular wig. In other words, it's not DNA.
But before it was over, that Chrysler LeBaron could offer up yet another big clue in the case of the killer clown.
The discovery of the LeBaron is a huge break.
We're able to tie the LeBaron that was used in the murder to Michael Warren's lot.
There's a license plate that's affixed to the Chrysler LeBaron when it's found at the Winn-Dixie parking lot.
When they run the car, they find out that it had been from a Payless used car lot and had been reported stolen about 2 weeks before.
The interesting thing about Payless car rental is that A-Bargain Motors is sort of at war with Payless.
Bargain Motors, of course, is the car lot that belongs to Michael Warren.
Michael Warren had a yellow page ad in the phone book for Bargain Motors. And the Bargain Motors ad had in very large letters, "Pay less."
It was really an ad for Bargain Motors that looked a lot like the Payless ad.
The person who's not really paying attention, when they start to turn the yellow pages, oh, pay less, and then they end up calling Michael Warren.
And that's what one couple told police happened to them. They say that they were duped by someone at Bargain Motors just weeks before the murder.
This husband and wife had rented that white car from Payless, not Bargain. When they went to return it, they mistakenly called Bargain Motors thinking that it was Payless.
They say they were told by someone at Michael Warren's lot, leave the car at the Payless lot where you rented it outside the gates with the keys in it. We'll pick it up. This couple thought, well, that sounds really strange, but they did it anyway because they had a plane to catch.
That LeBaron was taken back to A-Bargain Motors even though it didn't belong to them.
And that's how police allege the LeBaron came to be on Michael Warren's lot.
One of Michael's employees was arrested in connection with the theft of the LeBaron, and he was eventually convicted. Michael himself was never charged.
But who was it that used that car to go and kill Marlene? That was still the question.
Despite this link between the LeBaron and potentially Michael's car lot, there's not enough there for police to make an arrest. Michael had a pretty airtight alibi with witnesses. He was in the car with his friends heading to the racetrack.
Still, he wasn't out of hot water just yet.
Pretty quickly after the killing, investigators from a different police agency contact the sheriff's office and let them know that Bargain Auto Parts has been under surveillance for some shady dealings.
In fact, investigators from the West Palm Beach Police Department were looking into Mike Warren for rolling back odometers on his used cars.
There wasn't just one or two cars. It was a fleet of cars that we looked at in the 90s. I mean, the cars that we're talking about all had mechanical odometers that could be manipulated. It took some skill, and you had to know what you're doing, but it could be done.
For the record, it doesn't exactly work the way Matthew Broderick said it would in Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
Whatever miles we put on, we'll take off. We'll drive home backwards.
And by by October 1990, some 5 months after Marlene's murder, police execute a search warrant at Michael Warren's car dealership.
Police conduct a nighttime raid, and they go in, they swarm the property, they take away filing cabinets and insurance information and a slew of documents.
I like the helicopter and the jet the most.
Former neighbor John Herring remembers talking with Michael during this time and says he seemed to be more concerned about the impact on his business than the investigation into his wife's murder.
He said, they're taking all my files, they're taking everything, and I'm going to be out of business. And I thought it was a little bit strange that he didn't say anything about the shooting. And when I asked him, did you do it? And he said, of course not. And
You asked him to his face, did you kill your wife?
Yeah, well, I said, did you have anything to do with it? He says, no, of course not. I said, good.
On October 26th, Michael Warren is indeed arrested, but not for murder.
Michael is charged with 66 counts that included odometer tampering, grand theft, and racketeering.
Michael goes to trial for those fraud charges, but there's one big elephant in the room.
In open court, one of the assistant state attorneys said that Michael Warren was a suspect in the murder. And that opened a can of worms. It gave Michael Warren's attorney the option to say, this is a witch hunt. You know, you're railroading my client. And even a judge agreed with him.
The jury was considering 66 charges against Michael. They acquitted him of about a dozen of them, but found him guilty of 43 counts that included odometer tampering and fraud.
And Mr. Warren was then sentenced to 9 years in prison.
Michael is sent to prison to start his 9-year sentence. Meanwhile, the investigation into his wife's murder was still open.
A lot of different angles were taken to try to investigate the case, trying to turn up something. A lot of other witness statements were looked into.
Tips would come in, and different callers would say they had a lead as to who the killer clown was.
At this point, the only evidence prosecutors have is circumstantial. But prosecutors still don't have that proverbial smoking gun. But would another woman from Michael's life hold the key to solving his late wife's murder?
There were really intense rumors going around that Michael Warren was having an affair with someone at his car lot.
An affair being carried out right in front of everyone's eyes.
It's 1990, and who could forget the famous intro to the #1 show in the country, Cheers?
Oh, come on. Not all men are evil slime.
Oh, yeah, sure. You would defend them.
People everywhere want a Beanie Baby.
This is Legs, Allie. This is Goldie.
And nearly everybody's got Ice Ice Baby playing on their Sony Walkman. But something else is at the risk of turning cold. The case of the killer clown. And it's hard to imagine who's more frustrated by it all, the police or the local media who are just fighting for any scrap of information.
The police were very tight-knit on this investigation. They weren't giving the media a lot of information. They wanted to make sure that they were able to catch the killer.
Murders in Florida, especially in the early 90s, are rampant.
Some local residents, though, are upset that it took the killings of tourists to focus attention on a crime problem they face every day.
But what sets this case apart? The costume, the flowers, the balloons. It all seems to be so oddly personal.
It made sense that the killer had to have known or been associated with the family in some way.
Police get an anonymous call telling investigators to look into Marlene Warren's husband, Michael.
This person did not identify themselves. In fact, they very much did not want to be identified. It said Marlene Warren was just shot and killed. Somebody needs to look into Michael Warren.
The people that police were questioning were telling the police that Michael Warren was having an affair with a woman who worked on his car lot, Sheila Keene.
Sheila was a Glades girl. She grew up in the small towns on the outskirts of the Everglades near Lake Okeechobee. She was country, she was attractive, the boys liked her, and she liked money. She wanted a rich life. She wanted nice things.
She was very attractive, long, brunette, she had long hair.
On the podcast, The Killer Clown of Wellington, the former office manager at Bargain Motors, Suzanne Gould, remembers Sheila Keene and that she made quite an impression.
That first encounter with her, never saw her before, and then bam, she's there. The very first time I saw her, I remember her long, dark hair, and she was pretty, and she was very young.
She was 27 years old. Mr. Warren was, I think, almost 40.
Sheila Keene started working for Michael Warren as a repo woman.
She would repossess cars, sometimes in very rough areas, and so she was fearless.
She repos the cars. Michael Warren recovers his asset. Sheila Keene gets paid, by the repo that she brings in.
Sheila and Michael, they apparently began an affair. The other residents at the complex where Sheila lived said, "We thought Michael and Sheila were married. He was there so often."
Mr. Warren had actually paid for a place for her to live.
So Michael Warren was paying for an apartment for Sheila Keene.
Yes, that's according to the police, that's correct.
There are reports of some witnesses from A Bargain Motors that reported sexual activities inside Michael's office.
And according to witnesses, it sounds like Marlene may have been on to them.
There was an affair going on between them when Marlene was alive for a while, quite a while, from what I understand.
She never talked about it, though.
When they asked Mr. Warren about the supposedly affair with Sheila Keene, he denied it.
Sheila denied it outright. She would describe it, nope, we just worked together, we're just doing work.
In June 1990, just hours after investigators found the Chrysler LeBaron linked to Marlene Warren's murder, police were able to get a search warrant to search Sheila's apartment here in West Palm Beach.
They took a number of items, including the contents of the trash barrel in her bathroom.
No clown wig or clown costume or makeup is located at Miss Keene's apartment. No firearm that can be linked to this case is located.
It's another trail that leads basically nowhere. And the truth is, the news cycle moves quickly, and with hundreds of murders happening in South Florida that year, the case of the killer clown eventually all but disappears from the headlines.
Sometimes when we have these unsolved murders, there's sometimes a squeaky wheel that gets the grease. Family members, it's not unusual to hold their own press conferences to squeeze the police departments to try to do more than what they're doing. That didn't happen in this case. Unfortunately, Marlene kind of got lost.
It's out of sight, out of mind, because you get on with your life. But that don't mean that you forget anything, because memories come back for maybe just a few seconds. That's life. It's got to go on.
It would literally take decades, but something finally breaks the case of the killer clown wide open.
You see a case like this that's been open since 1990, and it's frustrating. It makes you think that there are some evil in this world that will never be punished, but then you get the breakthrough. This is true crime combined with sex and betrayal and an evil clown.
There's a knock at the door. Marlene Warren answers, and she's shot in cold blood.
I always heard rumors, if you mess up, you gonna get a visit. I was like, what are you talking about, clown?
I mean, many names have floated around. It's almost like out of a movie.
A
major break tonight in a 27-year-old unsolved mystery.
Has the killer clown been on the loose for 3 decades? Well, not anymore, after a courtroom shocker.
That's an outcome that I don't think anyone expected.
They were able to get away with it for so long.
It was just like shock after shock after shock.
There needs to be justice.
It had been more than 20 years since Marlene's murder. And yet, there were no arrests made.
I don't think this case was ever cold. Even though it was on the back burner, it was still on the burner. It was never closed.
So this case really took on new life in 2013 when the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office was able to get a $125,000 grant.
If they would have tried to file that
The cold case federal grant has enabled them to go back to this case and say, hey, we've got some monies now for some enhanced testing.
Back in 1990, the labs were not even utilizing DNA as we know it now. Forensics, as we know it today, was in its infancy. Back then it was fingerprints, fiber analysis, eyewitness ID. That's how cases were proved. As the science has advanced, we've had the ability to then go back and say, okay, we've got this old evidence. What can we do with it?
And by 2013, the case is being handled by a new sheriff in town and a new assistant DA.
I came into this and I looked at it basically with a complete fresh mind, fresh set of eyes. When you work on a cold case, it can be very challenging. Witnesses may not be around anymore. They may be deceased. Law enforcement witnesses may have retired. And you have to have an open mind in how you work on these cases.
In his fresh look at the 23-year-old case, Reed Scott goes back to that physical evidence found in the white Chrysler LeBaron, those questionable fibers, and something else.
Witnesses also say that there are strands of what appear to be longer, human-like brown hair inside of that vehicle.
If it was human hair, that would now provide something those other fibers would not. DNA.
They took a particular hair which had a portion of the root, a skin portion on it. And there are certain laboratories that will conduct what's called mitochondrial DNA analysis. That's a type of analysis that is conducted typically on older samples.
And beyond the physical evidence, there is yet another clue that keeps nagging at Reed Scott. Deborah Offord, the woman who managed the costume shop almost 30 years ago,
She had the intention of getting a clown.
she told the original investigators that the person who purchased the clown costume was in fact a woman.
When the police ask you about a description, what did you tell them?
Was very androgynous, had on long jeans, men's work boots, and the lumberjack kind of checkered shirts. And brown eyes, and I was always looking at people's makeup, and she didn't have on any makeup, no nail polish, no girly stuff, you know.
Remember, Marlene's son Joey, who witnessed the clown leaving, said he had thought it was a man, but that was only because of the person's size.
Well, to me, it seemed like a man. What? The big hands and the size of the person.
One of the things that I do remember about her is that she was rather tall. I'd say probably around 5'8".
But even that critical piece of information provided to investigators right after the murder never led to an arrest. The case had long gone cold, and Michael Warren was moving on with his life, seemingly leaving the grief of losing his wife behind. And in 1997, he had a new woman in his life, a girlfriend named Debbie.
He
to the Blue Ridge Mountains, living a very quiet life. Michael owned a little fast food joint called the Purple Cow, which he was running with Debbie.
The Purple Cow is a little drive-through fast food restaurant right off of a busy little highway. It has 3 life-size purple cows out front.
It was super popular. You have ribs, fried green tomatoes.
They're known for the steak bomb, and they got a Mike's Intimidator, which is a pound of hamburger meat on a bun.
Michael and Debbie work long hours, sometimes 6 days a week.
Debbie would actually come on the grill. She would do the water window, the grill, the fryer, and the hand-out window, and the phone at the same time. While Mike done all the prep, he would hand-cut his steaks, like his ribeyes and T-bones.
By most accounts, Debbie and Mike treat their staff like family.
He would act like my dad. He taught me how to cook, like he taught me my multiplication tables. When Mike was at Purple Cow, he'd seen everybody on cruises, and he would pay for it all. There I am in the ocean at Nassau. He made sure you were taken care of. They were in love. Like, you just look at Debbie and tell me she loved him. She had that sparkle in her eyes. Like, every time she would look at him, she would just smile.
They had a sprawling mansion on a lake in the Blue Ridge Mountains. Steepled house, brick, very fancy with a boat dock out front. And the two of them were known in this very tight-knit community as a happy, fun, very close couple.
It was just a real relaxed relationship. We all just enjoyed being each other's company.
You could tell they cared about each other. Well, they'd hold hands some and...
Very loving relationship.
But other neighbors say they see a different side of that rough-around-the-edges former used car dealer. Vicki and John Chittister say they had a nasty run-in with Michael Warren after he suddenly shows up at their lakeside property trying to haul away rocks with his tractor.
I told him to put down the rocks and get off our property.
And said, can we be neighborly about this? And I told him, I said, the neighborly thing would be to call over and ask if you could come over here and do that. He said, he's like, what are you going to do, you scrawny? I said, I'll tell you what I'm going to do, you fat ass. But he wouldn't get off the tractor. And so he unloaded the rock.
He was the bully.
Somebody thinks he's going to get what he wants.
Yes, exactly.
But will their unsuspecting neighbors living on the lake get the shock of their lives? Is the killer clown about to make another appearance?
I always heard rumors about if you mess up, you're going to get a visit from a clown. I was like, what are you talking about, clown?
Living a new life with his significant other, Debbie, in Virginia. But dogged reporters back in Florida never gave up the scent.
In May, which was the 27th anniversary of the killing, my editor said, well, let's relook at this. So I asked our researcher to take a look at a few things.
I was assisting Barbara Marshall, who was a features reporter who was writing the article. She asked if I could find Mike Warren.
She found that they were living in Abington, Virginia, in the Blue Ridge Mountains.
The Sun-Sentinel's Tanya Alanez was also hot on the trail, and she made her way up to Virginia.
During my reporting visit in Virginia, I'm constantly asking about Sheila Keene. And one of the neighbors invites me in, and somewhere in the midst of our conversation, she just lets it drop and refers to Debbie and Michael. And I just kind of halted the conversation. I was like, wait, what? Who is Debbie?
It turns out that Debbie is just an alias. She was actually Sheila Keene, the woman with whom Michael was rumored to have had an affair. Debbie, with the long brown hair, is now 27 years older and blonde.
It was not surprising that she's now called Debbie by her friends in Virginia. She tried to hide, and one way to hide is to change your name.
The first time I ever seen Sheila Keene was when I'd actually go to a mailbox and check the mail, and Debbie would say that was her mom. Never knew her real name was Sheila Keene.
And there's one more surprise.
In public records, who you are, will be discovered. What I found was that Sheila and Mike Warren had gotten married 12 years after the murder. I went to Barbara's desk and I said, Barbara, they're married.
She found that Michael Warren and Sheila Keene had gotten married 12 years after the murder in Las Vegas.
That's right, Michael Warren's once alleged mistress is now his wife. The two married at that famous Little White Chapel in Las Vegas.
Once Michael was released from prison, he reunited with Sheila, and they took their life to Tennessee and Virginia and just carried on with a new life.
They thought they were going to live happily ever after, until law enforcement started knocking on their door in 2017.
Our agency received a call in regards to the murder of an individual that occurred back in 1990. The person of interest that they were looking at did reside in our county in an area called Heron Point. They kept a very low profile. They, I guess, sort of flew under the radar.
Palm Beach prosecutors have by now issued an arrest warrant based on new evidence of their own.
She and Michael were returning home from a road trip to Vermont, and they were driving their black Cadillac Escalade.
The vehicles were strategically placed along various locations and observed the black Cadillac Escalade. We had vehicles that were positioned to the front of the vehicle, affected to stop in this area. Vehicles came up behind it.
And when the deputy came up to the driver's door, he said he had a warrant for Sheila's arrest.
They had a warrant for Sheila, but not for Michael.
And we told her she was under arrest for the murder that had occurred in Florida a number of years ago.
Michael Warren, there was no warrant out for his arrest. He was not facing criminal charges.
We have our suspicions, but we don't have enough evidence to file any charges against him. Although I think it's hard to believe that Michael Warren knew nothing about this, but as a prosecutor, we live on evidence, not suspicions.
She was removed from the vehicle, placed in one of our patrol vehicles, handcuffed, and transported to the regional jail.
He was questioned briefly by the side of the road, and he was released.
A major break tonight in a 27-year-old unsolved mystery. Police in Florida arresting a female suspect in what had been called the killer clown case.
It was a bit of a media circus when we announced the arrest of Sheila Keene Warren, but rightly so. It generated a firestorm of interest.
Police in Virginia have made an arrest in a bizarre 27-year-old cold case.
Sheila Keene Warren, accused of dressing up as a clown and killing the victim as she opened her door. This case haunted a family and a Florida community for nearly 30 years.
Especially when they saw the defendant who lived a new life in Virginia. It gets our spidey senses tingling.
This was a tenacious effort on the part of the cold case detectives and the people from the state attorney's office and the FBI.
She is anxious to be transported to Florida. She is anxious to have her day in court and to prove her innocence.
We filed the notice of intent to seek the death penalty today, just now, with the court.
Your Honor,
At first appearance, she appeared to be shell-shocked.
State is seeking no longer.
Sheila pleads not guilty, even with the death penalty hanging over her head.
Sheila said that she could not possibly have committed this crime because she was out repoing cars at the time.
Not only is she not pointed the finger at anyone else, she continues to proclaim her innocence.
When the Warren's Virginia neighbors heard about Sheila's arrest, they were just flabbergasted. I love her unconditionally, regardless of how it turns out.
And just hope and pray that she's not guilty.
But authorities are convinced she is guilty, and they're ready to go to trial.
Sometimes justice can be delayed, but justice eventually arrives.
While Sheila is behind bars, there's yet another surprise. Police dredge up a car from the Florida Canal, hoping to find the murder weapon.
The allegation was that the clown costume, the wig, and the firearm were to be found inside.
Something's got to happen. She got away with it for so long.
When I heard that Sheila and Mike got married, wow, that threw me on a loop there.
I turned angry when I heard Mike had married Sheila. Angry. She killed my daughter, and he marries her.
Sheila Keene Warren is the only one that had the means, motive, and opportunity to commit this crime.
There's this photo taken of Sheila, oddly smiling while in custody, and it's oddly reminiscent of a mugshot taken when she was 21 and convicted of shoplifting.
But this is hardly a slam dunk case. Anytime you're going to try someone for murder, it does help to have two things: a positive ID from an eyewitness and the murder weapon. And in this case, you have neither.
But just 5 months after Sheila's arrest, investigators are wondering if they finally hit pay dirt on that missing murder weapon. They get a tip out of the blue from one of Michael's former employees.
That former employee tells investigators he has information about where to find a second car he claims is connected to Marlene Warren's murder. Inside that car, he says, is a critical piece of missing evidence: the murder weapon.
This is the C-51 Canal, and this is the place where in 2018 investigators came to look for what they thought was the second getaway car in Marlene Warren's murder.
The allegation was that the clown costume, the wig, and the firearm were to be found inside.
Remember, there are critical pieces of physical evidence that are still missing. So the question is, could they be hidden in that car at the bottom of that murky Florida Canal?
They dredged the canal. A car is pulled out of the canal at the exact location where the vehicle is supposed to be.
It's almost like a body being exhumed from the grave.
They ended up fishing out a 1982 Audi from this canal here. And when they looked inside, ultimately they couldn't find anything that would connect that car to Marlene Warren's death.
It turns out to be a false lead. And that leaves prosecutors trying to build a case that is almost entirely circumstantial.
It's the story that the evidence tells all together. Can you link enough of these pieces of the puzzle together to paint a compelling picture?
Some of them would be things investigators learned 30 years ago that would now be critical to their case.
Investigators say that one of the very first pieces of that puzzle lies at the supermarket where the flowers and balloons were purchased.
You find that two workers inside of a Publix supermarket describe a person dressed in worker clothes with gloves and long brown hair.
Now, the interesting thing about this Publix here is that it is less than a mile from the apartment where Sheila was living.
This person, fitting the description of Sheila Keene, purchased 3 items that are subsequently found at the homicide scene 82 minutes prior to the murder.
And then there's that description from those costume shop employees from the very first week of the investigation, the ones who ID'd Sheila from a photo shown to them by the police. If you look at this picture, do you see a resemblance to the woman that you saw in here? Possibly?
Yes.
Each lady identifies her from 2 photo lineups as the person who bought and purchased this clown costume.
Prosecutors will build their case on a series of oddly coincidental accounts of Sheila having dressed up as a clown.
There was a man who owned an auto parts store in the little town of Pahokee, and he called police with a very interesting story about Sheila Keene.
She came in wearing a full clown outfit. She said she delivered flowers and stuff as a clown. We teased her about being in the clown outfit. She gave as good as she got. She grabbed her stuff and took on off. Never saw her again.
And then there's this photo, taken years later at the Purple Cow, showing Sheila with her face painted like a clown. There were reports that somebody fitting Sheila Keene's description had bought a clown costume. There were reports that somebody fitting her description had bought flowers and balloons. She had been known to dress as a clown previously before. There was talk that she was having an affair with Marlene Warren's husband. Aren't those enough circumstantial bits to try to bring this thing to a case?
Thinking that somebody did something, knowing it and be able to prove it in a court of law, 2 different things. What you do not want to do is go into court without a case and take your best shot and lose.
I 100% believe that Sheila Keene Warren is guilty of this crime. When I looked at all of the evidence, there was no doubt in my mind that we had the right person and that she needed to be brought to trial.
But did authorities have the right person? What if those strands of hair allegedly linking Sheila Keene Warren to the murder actually belonged to someone else?
Joe Aarons has spent a lifetime trying to unravel the mystery of his mom's murder. Now, more than 30 years later, he suddenly recalls an ominous interaction.
The first time I was in a setting with Sheila Keene was at a party at our house, probably about 6 months or so before the murder. Mike's mother says, "Marlene, you're gonna have to watch that one. She's a pretty one." And my mom responded with, "Well, is that the only thing you're helping him with? The cooking?" And she turned around with a little smirk and said, "Yeah," and that was the end of the conversation.
True crime is a hot genre, and this is true crime combined with sex and betrayal.
There were just a lot of unanswered questions for decades, always nagging.
It has all the makings of a made-for-TV movie.
But some truth is stranger than fiction, and as prosecutors are preparing for trial in a killing 3 decades old, it's clear that they're depending on DNA to make their case.
When this case was originally investigated, DNA was in its infancy. You had some DNA for blood evidence, but not for hair. And that's what really broke this case.
Remember those 2 strands of brown hair detectives discovered in the white Chrysler LeBaron found back in 1990? Decades later, they sent those old hair samples to the FBI for advanced DNA testing, not available back in the 90s.
There were 2 hairs that were looked at. One hair is designated as hair 39-1. When they took 39-1 on and separated the root portion of the hair, mitochondrial DNA analysis was done, and it was determined that Sheila Keene Warren is the source of that.
That DNA match, prosecutors say, proves that Sheila Keene Warren was in fact the killer clown.
Prosecutors say the results of these new DNA tests are what they finally need to go to trial.
What this case is really about is an innocent woman who's facing prosecution for a crime she didn't commit.
She went into solitary confinement in the Palm Beach County Jail soon after her arrest and has been there since.
Sheila has been in jail awaiting trial for 5 years. In 1990, there was absolutely no forensic evidence found on scene related to or tying the murder to Sheila Keene Warren.
Enter Greg Rosenfeld, a powerful trial-tested defense lawyer who's represented several high-profile Florida defendants.
Greg Rosenfeld was one of the attorneys who represented Dahlia DiPolito, who was accused of hiring a hitman to kill her husband.
This court has a legal and ethical obligation to ensure that Dahlia DiPolito gets a fair and impartial trial.
Even before trial, Rosenfeld is arguing the case prosecutors have built against Sheila Keene Warren simply doesn't measure up, referring to the height of the so-called killer clown.
You have 4 people at the crime scene, and all 4 of these people said the shooter was over 6 feet tall. Sheila Keene Warren is between 5'6" and 5'7".
The fact that one witness described the kind of 6'1" does not hurt the case, because you have people who identified Sheila Keene Warren as the person who bought the clown costume. I mean, you're wearing this clown costume where you have a wig on your head, and it does make you look taller.
Sheila's attorney also points to all the ambiguity about the gender of the clown.
3 of the 4 people definitively stated that the shooter was a man.
If the clown wasn't dressed up as a clown, it would be problematic that Joey thought the clown was a man. But the clown was dressed up as a clown to disguise features, to disguise the clown's gender. And this murderer wanted to make it harder for police to find them.
Rosenfeld even has an explanation for that all-important DNA evidence, the 2 hairs that prosecutors say place Sheila inside that Chrysler LeBaron.
The DNA evidence is beyond questionable. 2 pieces of hair found in the LeBaron might not even belong to Sheila Keene Warren, and we believe that one of them, based on the amount of male DNA on the hair root, possibly belonged to a man.
The DNA showed that Sheila Keene Warren drove that car, and she's the one who married Marlene Warren's husband after she was out of the picture.
Ah, the affair. Now that's a tough one for the defense, because she was rumored to be involved with him romantically, and then lo and behold, she marries him after his wife turns up dead.
You've got her having an affair with Michael Warren before and married to him afterwards.
They made her their suspect. And even though none of the evidence fit, they essentially have been forcing pieces to fit this puzzle that just don't fit. They went from not having probable cause to arrest Sheila Keene Warren to this forensic evidence, which is circumstantial evidence stacked on circumstantial evidence, to indict this woman.
The long-awaited killer clown trial out of Florida.
This morning, a judge set a new trial date for May the 12th.
These hearings will continue tomorrow. They'll be moving on to other pieces of evidence.
All they have to do is convict her all the way.
There needs to be justice.
But with justice already delayed and the start of the trial just days away, a courtroom shocker nobody saw coming.
A huge surprise. The fabled clown sighting file has been found.
It's ridiculous to have 200 people coming into courthouse today to pick a jury on this case. This stuff should not happen.
By late 2022, Sheila Keene Warren has been in jail for 5 years, awaiting trial for the murder of Marlene Warren.
It's 8 days away from trial, and suddenly, a huge surprise. The fabled clown sighting file has been found.
The clown sighting file was mentioned in a police report back in 1990.
It contains roughly 40 potential leads. These are clown sightings from the day of the murder and the days following. Sheila's defense attorneys asked the prosecutor and the investigators for that file for years, several times. And every time they were told, we can't find it.
So he finally decides to file a motion to compel the state to produce this information.
The next day, the clown sighting file suddenly appears. After 3 years of me asking for that clown sighting file, it was in a box for Michael Warren's odometer tampering case.
This was a 33-year-old cold case with boxes and boxes of files in the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office. looked for it, and they couldn't find it. And then it was just there. There was obviously nothing intentional.
The day jury selection was supposed to begin, the attorneys had to reconvene in the courthouse to explain why this had happened.
How is it possible then that the sheriffs didn't see that file? Right? It's ridiculous. This stuff should not happen.
So at that point, the judge gives Sheila's defense 60 days to investigate those leads.
When we received the clown sighting file, our investigator attempted to track down these people. Numbers were disconnected, people had moved. I mean, we couldn't track down these people. You're talking 32, 33 years later.
So in the months leading up to this new trial date, Sheila's defense continues to file these motions trying to suppress some of the prosecutor's key evidence. One of those pieces of evidence is a mysterious fiber.
This 6 to 8 inch fiber was found embedded in a balloon ribbon left at the scene of the crime, but investigators didn't find it until decades later when they reopened the case.
In 1990, Detective Harrison recovered the 2 balloons and the balloon ribbons. He looked over the balloons for any trace evidence, saw nothing, sealed them, and stored them.
This evidence gets passed year over year through multiple people before, in 2013, an investigator picks it up and finds a mysterious fiber that no investigator has previously reported seeing.
The ribbon was a pink, white, and red ribbon, and my swab was kind of getting stuck as I was trying to go through the ribbon. And as I got closer, I noticed that there was a fiber that was in the ribbon.
After 24 years, this fiber suddenly appears. It's absolutely preposterous. We think that the fiber got in the evidence bag by contamination.
It was such a minute piece of evidence that it was overlooked back then, but there was nothing nefarious about it.
The prosecutor said that this fiber was consistent with another fiber found at Sheila Keen Warren's apartment, linking the two together. But her defense attorney said the only thing that this fiber is evidence of is contamination. And to back that up, they have this report from 1999 that says that the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office was improperly storing evidence from that Wellington crime scene in open bags.
The Palm Beach Post wrote a scathing article about this, describing the conditions in which the evidence was stored.
County auditors have discovered some of the evidence was improperly stored. Open bags containing a white clown glove, 7 types of clown makeup, an orange wig, and a bozo-type suit linked to the Wellington murder were found this fall inside the sheriff's evidence room.
The packaging of the evidence was horrific. They have evidence bags just torn open, not repackaged properly, anything.
You're talking about rips of outer bags, not the inner bags, right? So, look, I realize it's a bad look, but it didn't contaminate the evidence.
But in that same court hearing with the investigator who found that fiber decades later, you can hear her gasp as the ribbon falls out of the bag as she is presenting it in court.
The prosecution did come in with this gung-ho attitude when they arrested her, and then piece by piece, her defense starts to pick holes in that argument. And so close to trial, I think you could see the prosecution losing steam.
But just last week, with yet another new trial date looming, everybody's summoned to the courtroom for what will be a shocking 11th hour turn of events.
Stunning new developments in the killer clown murder out of Palm Beach County.
So, with less than a month until trial begins, we hear that Sheila Keen Warren is about to plead guilty. This is a total shock.
Ms. Keen Warren, the defendant herein, will agree to withdraw her previously entered plea of not guilty and her plea of guilty of second-degree murder. The defendant is pleading guilty because she's guilty and a factual basis does exist for the crime.
Are you in full agreement with all those terms?
Yes, sir. At one point, Marlene Warren's son spoke over Zoom.
The only thing I want to say is, All through this trial, I didn't see any remorse. God be with her.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Sheila's sentenced to 12 years in prison, but with sentencing guidelines and with credit for time served, she could be out in 16 to 18 months.
It was just like shock after shock after shock. First execution, then life in prison, and now she's gonna go home as early as 16 months from now. That's an outcome that I don't think anyone expected.
This plea deal is a compromise for both sides. For the prosecutors, they get a murder conviction, but the sentencing terms are extremely lenient for second-degree homicide. For Sheila, yeah, she's now a convicted murderer, but she will most likely be a free woman next year.
I can't say this enough. Sheila is innocent. Were we disappointed that we didn't get to try this? Of course. But our job is to get her home. It was very difficult for her to accept that she was pleading guilty to this crime, but no one in their right mind is going to play Russian roulette with their life.
This is imperfect justice. This is not the happy ending that I wanted, but we don't live in a fairy tale. She will always be a convicted murderer, and that's a stain that will never be washed away.
The big question, now that Sheila has pled guilty, what about her husband, Mike Warren? What he's saying only to 2020 next.
Sheila Keene Warren was the murderer of my mother. I was there, I saw her eyes. I'll tell you, I will never forget them.
That 21-year-old young man who saw his mother gunned down more than 30 years ago says it took a lifetime to regain his footing.
It affected me with anger, alcohol abuse. Finally, I broke down and I said, enough is enough. I can't do this on my own. I have to go to a rehab.
At 54, Joe Aaron says he is finally letting go of the demons of his past. And just days after Sheila Keene Warren pled guilty to his mom's murder, he visited her grave.
I was telling her we finally got truth, we finally got closure, and it's been a long road. I'm glad that she was there the whole time. I mean, there's times that I thought I was alone, but I was really not.
You have part relief, part gratitude, because this took a lot of work for justice to happen. This case was cold. The defendant thought she had gotten away with it. I think a lot of people did, but the long arm of the law caught up with her finally.
The woman accused of dressing up in costume and murdering her lover's wife has pled guilty.
When she took the guilty plea, I was shocked. I mean, I was so shocked. You know, I thought we'd never get that out of her.
That plea wasn't the life sentence Joe Aarons was hoping for.
She was not remorseful at all through the whole trial. I hope I see that come out of her. That will help me in a lot of ways.
She's a murderer, and it hurts me to know that she will walk free one day. But at least I know that for the past 5.5 years, she has sat in solitary confinement in our local jail. And for the rest of her life, she's going to be known as a convicted murderer.
Guilty or not, I was going to be okay. I pray for her now that, you know, she gets through it and comes out of this. You know, it's going to be hard for her.
And now the question many are asking, what's next for Michael Warren?
If we're able to obtain evidence pointing to Mike Warren, we'll prosecute him. But there's not enough evidence. It gets harder by the day to prosecute someone for a case that happened in 1990.
In a statement to 2020, Michael Warren said he's innocent, and the comments and actions of prosecutors, including the accusation that he was involved in Marlene's murder, are reckless and shameful. He also said that despite the guilty plea, he believes his wife is innocent and is grateful that she'll be home in 16 to 18 months.
That's a good picture.
Yes, it is.
33 years to justice. a day Joe's grandmother never lived to see.
My grandmother just died recently. I want my mother to know that I'm all right. I'm going to be okay. She was an angel. She did not deserve this. She's not here in flesh, but she's still here in spirit. I do believe my mother is at peace now.
A bizarre 30-year-old cold case finally closed. That's our program for tonight. Thanks so much for watching. I'm Deborah Roberts. From all of us here at 2020 and ABC News, good night.